This is Dennis McMahon, and welcome to Positively Vermont. And my special guest is Matthew Denhart, the president of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Dennis. Great to see you. Thanks for having me back on your show.
And it's always a pleasure. And there's a lot of interesting things that have been going on with the foundation. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as you so kindly said, I'm Matt Denhart, president of the Coolidge Foundation, based in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, home of Calvin Coolidge, 30th president of the United States and one of Vermont's two presidents. Coolidge was president, as many of your viewers will know, from 1923 to 1929. And Plymouth Notch is just a real gem, something that I hope everyone in the area will come and visit sometime. It's often called the best preserved presidential birthplace in America. We're proud to work with the state of Vermont and especially the Historic Sites Division to welcome guests and so they can learn more about Coolidge and an important piece of American history and Vermont history.
And tell us a little bit about Grace Coolidge, who I understand was born in Burlington.
That's right. Yeah, Grace, Calvin Coolidge's wife, the First Lady. She was actually the first college-educated First Lady. She, as you say, was born in Burlington, Grace Goodhue, and grew up in Burlington, attended the University of Vermont, was very active in her sorority there, a diligent, careful student as well, vivacious, very social, very well liked by everybody. She actually didn't meet Calvin in Vermont, though. She moved to Northampton, Massachusetts after college, and she was doing additional training to be a teacher of the deaf at a school called the Clark School for the Deaf in Northampton. And Calvin himself had made his way to Northampton after finishing college at Amherst. And he was studying to be a lawyer. He read the law rather than go to law school and was beginning his legal career when they happened to meet in Northampton and quickly fell in love and were married. And Grace was in many ways quite different from Calvin. He was quiet, serious, though had a great dry sense of humor. She was vivacious, kind of the life of every room she entered. And together, they're really a wonderful pair.
Interesting. You might tell us about this nickname that he had, Silent Cal. What's that all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, Coolidge was not one for idle chit chat, that's for sure. But he did have a very serious mind, and when he had something to say, he said it, and he said it quite eloquently. So he was especially as a youngster, he was very shy. He wrote that he had trouble even coming into the family's living room to greet the guests of his father. That it took all his courage to come around the door and say hello and introduce himself. But he overcame that. I'd say he remained an introvert, and maybe we could use more introverts today in a world that can't seem to stop talking and expressing opinions. But Coolidge remained an introvert, but to suggest that he never talked wouldn't be accurate either. In fact, he had more press conferences than any other president who served a similar length of time. He averaged two a week, which is a pretty remarkable clip. He was very had good relations with the press, very very kind of frank with them. And he also gave many speeches, many wonderful, beautiful speeches. In fact, there are three books of his speeches that were published in the 1920s. The first of which is called "Have Faith in Massachusetts," and two others, "The Price of Freedom" and "Foundations of the Republic." And when you can still go and see those books. In fact, at the foundation, we've republished the first of those, the price, or pardon me, "Have Faith in Massachusetts." Hope to republish the others. But what you see are very eloquent speeches. He put tremendous effort into them, and they're not short. You might think with a nickname Silent Cal that his speeches would be a line or two long, or maybe a paragraph. But often, they go on and are quite involved and developed. So yeah, Silent Cal I think is fair. It certainly captures his introverted personality, but when he did speak, he sure had a lot to say.
Well, tell us a little bit about his personal biography and his trajectory to the White House.
Yeah, I think it's a great story of kind of the American dream fulfilled. He grew up in Plymouth Notch. For those who haven't been to Plymouth Notch, again, we hope you'll come and see it. You really have to be there to get a true sense of the place. But Vermonters will recognize many villages not too different from Plymouth Notch, which is to say, charming, quaint, and very isolated, where the elements, pose a real challenge. So he was born July 4, 1872, the only American president born on the 4th of July, in Plymouth Notch, to a father, John Coolidge, and um, his mother would die when he was young, and he had one sister as well, Abigail, who was a little bit younger. He attended a one-room schoolhouse in Plymouth and was mostly raised by his father because of his mother's untimely death. Life in Plymouth was, he says, was a wonderful environment to grow up in, but certainly was very isolated. His father was sort of a great citizen, if you will, a jack of all trades, really a wonderful role model for Coolidge in how one ought to be involved in the community and provide leadership in the community. His father ran the general store. He ran the farm. He later went on to start the Plymouth Cheese Factory, which continues to operate today. He was a justice of the peace. He was the town constable, the tax collector. He certainly was very involved in town meeting. So Coolidge really had a early glimpse, not just glimpse, but kind of real life experience with local government and kind of civics and what one's responsibilities are. He went to high school down in Ludlow, nearby at Black River Academy. He boarded with his aunt down in Ludlow. Today, you can drive from Ludlow to Plymouth in maybe 20 minutes, but of course, back then, before the automobiles, it would have been a serious journey back and forth. So he boarded during the week. His grades were not remarkable. I don't think you would say this is the one who's going to be president. He certainly still was quite introverted and shy. And his marks, particularly in mathematics, weren't especially strong. He did somewhat better in the humanities. He especially liked Greek and Latin, and really enjoyed again civics. He talks about having read the Constitution and America's founding documents in this time in his life, and that it was a subject that fascinated him, throughout his life and going forward. He then tried to get into Amherst College and actually failed on his first attempt. He went to take the entrance exam. He was sick apparently and didn't even finish the exam. So he returned home to Plymouth Notch, for the summer plus more, working with his father on the farm and in the general store. And then he did a special term at St. Johnsbury Academy up in St. J. And they had a special program where if you proved yourself there, then you could have a letter that recommended you to Amherst and were likely to be admitted. And indeed he was. So he then made his way off to Amherst. Again, at first did not succeed. If you look at the letters with Calvin and his father, there's a wonderful book of them called Your Son, Calvin Coolidge, published by the Vermont Historical Society that I'd commend to your viewers, Dennis. But anyway, these wonderful letters, but you see, nervous, shy, very lonely Calvin writing to his father, saying that the homesickness is almost killing him and he's not sure he can succeed and what am I going to do? And but then, you see him over time, as young people do, blossoming, getting confidence. And ultimately, by the time he graduated from Amherst, he was respected by his peers. He finally was able to join a fraternity, which he had been rejected from as a freshman, and was sort of well on his way. So then, as I mentioned, he read the law in Northampton rather than going to law school. Law school was certainly was the even then was the more common route for someone who wanted to be a lawyer. His father thought that seemed expensive, and there was another route available. So in typical Yankee and Coolidge fashion, he was thrifty, read the law, which basically means he apprenticed with a local firm, Hammond and Field at the time in Northampton. And even pardon me, in the evenings he studied, particularly at the Forbes Library down in Northampton, which today has many of his papers and his records. And he passed the bar exam even early, ahead of schedule. He was very diligent, and then became a small town lawyer. Got involved in local politics and really worked his way up the political ladder. He was not he was not the outsider who became president like we sometimes see today.
Hmm.
In fact, quite the opposite. He was very prepared. He had served in Northampton as mayor, in the General Court of Massachusetts, both in the House and in the Senate. He eventually rose to be the president of the Massachusetts Senate. He then was the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, then the governor of Massachusetts, and then, of course, vice president, elected in the 1920 election with Warren Harding, and then dramatically became president upon the passing of Warren Harding in 1923. So I maybe gave you more detail than you were
Oh,
looking
that's
for,
great.
Dennis, but that's the route that led Calvin from small village hamlet in Vermont, that where there was not electricity, and for most of his life, no train, all the way to the White House.
That's great stuff. Maybe give us a little thumbnail about what his term as president was and what he did after the presidency.
Yeah, absolutely. So he came to office as president in 1923, and again, it was that anniversary is coming right up. It was the evening of August 2nd into the early morning of August 3rd when President Harding, who was traveling out west, died somewhat unexpectedly. I think many knew that he was ill, but didn't expect him necessarily to pass. Calvin and Grace were visiting Calvin's father in Plymouth Notch itself on in those weeks, and again there was no telephone in the Coolidge family household, and so the word came in the middle of the night that President Harding had died. A messenger literally drove to Plymouth and knocked on the door, woke up Calvin's father, who went upstairs and banged on his son's door to tell him to wake up and you're now the president. So he took the oath of office in the family sitting room at 2:47 a.m. on August 3rd in 1923. And actually, we'll reenact that. We reenact that every year on the Saturday nearest to that. So we look forward to doing that this year and invite the public to come and join us. But then Coolidge served out the balance of Warren Harding's term, but then ran for election himself as president in 1924. It wasn't obvious, immediately, Dennis. In hindsight, it can seem obvious that he'd have a good chance and would win, but there were many even in the Republican Party, Coolidge's party, that thought they might like to run for president. And Coolidge managed to very quickly gain the trust of the American people. And he was nominated easily and then elected in really a landslide, one of the landslide elections in American history, defeating John Davis, the Democratic candidate, and the Progressive Party candidate, Robert La Follette, who actually was in that era, the Progressive Party was a breakoff from the Republican Party. So Coolidge's own party, in a way, split, and Coolidge still managed an absolute majority in a three-way race. So he was very popular in his term as president. Then he served through 1929, through March of 1929. And his major accomplishments really related, I'd say, to fiscal policy. The federal budget today, we talk about the national debt and are rightly concerned about that. That was an issue in Coolidge's day too, right after World War One. We had accumulated quite a bit of debt and were running budget deficits, of course, to finance the war, had high taxes. The income tax during World War One in particular had risen all the way to 77%, which is just an incredible rate. Under Harding and then under Coolidge, tax rates came down. Coolidge ushered through, working with Congress, of course, a number of tax cuts, bringing the top marginal rate on the income tax down all the way to 25%. It's the lowest it's been since that time. And today, we worry that cutting taxes could increase budget deficits and further create debt challenges, and of course that can be the case. But Coolidge's example is that he paired those tax cuts with budget cuts, and so much so that he was able to balance the budget every year, and that the national debt, he was able to retire about a quarter of the national debt, even in his short term in office. The economy in the 1920s roared. You hear about the Roaring Twenties, and a lot of this was certainly was due to the kind of predictability that came from the Coolidge administration, leaving more money in the private sector through these tax cuts and balanced budget. And so you saw remarkable innovation. This is the decade when I think the economy really entered the modern era. This is when most people would have gotten indoor plumbing, electricity, when a car went from being a luxury good to a mass-produced item that many families could afford. This is even the decade, Dennis, when the work week shrank generally from 6 days a week to 5 days a week. And you say, how was that possible? Well, it was possible because of such immense productivity gains. People were able to produce as much in 5 days as they used to do in six, which is pretty remarkable. So Coolidge left office. You asked what did he do in his post-presidency. Unfortunately, it was somewhat brief. He left in March of 1929. Now we have our inaugural transitions in January, but back then it was in March. So he left in March of 1929. He finished his autobiography, which remains a well-selling book. We've republished it at the foundation. It's just a wonderful presidential memoir that I commend to everybody. The autobiography of Calvin Coolidge. It's quite brief. You can read it in one sitting or two, maybe,
Mm.
but really gives you a sense of the man and his values and principles. Doesn't get into the weeds, of the political fights of that era so much. Really just stays high level and talks about principles and really kind of core American values. So I commend it to all. So he finished that. He served on the board of New York Life Insurance Company. That was the one sort of job he had. He also wrote a syndicated column for a year, a daily syndicated column every day, and it had a maximum of 300 words. So in his way of being brief, but he packed a lot of meaning into those 300 words each day. That went out, published, on a syndicate. The column was called Calvin Coolidge Says. You can find all those columns on our foundation website in our archive, coolidgefoundation.org. And he had moved back to Northampton, I guess I should mention, with his wife Grace. They moved back into half of a duplex that they had rented their entire adult life on Massasoit Street. And that's where he intended to live out his life. What he found was he had so many admirers who would come to gather on the sidewalks that he was becoming a disruption in that quiet residential neighborhood. So they did buy a more private house. The beaches that he enjoyed a short time at before dying in 1933 in
Mm.
January, at only the age of 60. Grace lived many more decades. She lived until 1957. And Coolidge's son, he had two sons, I should mention, John and Calvin Jr. Calvin Jr. himself also tragically died in 1924 when Coolidge was president of a blister that he sustained playing tennis at the White House. And he didn't tell anyone about it at first. It became infected, and he very sadly died. So death was something that Coolidge had to overcome throughout his life. His mother, his sister, and his son, and then he died, as I said, in 1933. But his surviving son, John Coolidge, started the Coolidge Foundation in 1960, and that's the organization that we remain today.
Tell us a little bit about the activities of the Coolidge Foundation this summer and into the future.
Well, thanks, Dennis, for the opportunity to share our work. This summer is an exciting one. We've already hosted a great 4th of July celebration that takes place every summer. We hope, especially next year, many will come and visit us. A wreath is sent from the White House via the National Guard, who come with a general of the Guard to lay it on Coolidge's grave. Next summer, I should point out, will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So it'll be an especially meaningful celebration, along with it being Coolidge's birthday. So we're planning a big celebration. We hope folks will join us. We've also hosted already this summer the Coolidge Cup National High School Speech and Debate Tournament. And we'd love for more Vermonters to be involved. They can be involved as competitors, debating and declaiming Coolidge speeches. Information about how to qualify is on our website, coolidgefoundation.org. They also, especially, can be involved as citizen judges of these competitions. Really important. All the judging is done by citizens. So please come join us and help us. It's a very meaningful volunteer opportunity. Again, coolidgefoundation.org. Upcoming still this summer, on August 1st will be our summer dinner. Tickets are required, but I think are very reasonably priced, and we'll be joined by the recent Archivist of the United States, Colleen Shogan, for a discussion of the importance of history and civics and remembering America's civic traditions. And the next day, August 2nd, we will host a reenactment of Coolidge's homestead inauguration. Former Vermont Governor Jim Douglas, who serves on our board, will be there. He'll be playing the role of Colonel John Coolidge, who's Calvin's father, who administered that oath to the president in the middle of the night. So we hope folks will come out to see that and perhaps see Governor Douglas. And sorry, I need to backtrack just a little bit. On July 31st, pardon me, I neglected to say, at 11 a.m., we'll host a naturalization ceremony, which is a ceremony when new citizens take the oath of allegiance to the United States, and a federal judge will be there presiding, and a very meaningful ceremony where folks recall the privileges and the responsibilities of citizenship. So we hope folks will come and join us for that as well.
Okay, well, finally, tell us a little bit about membership and also your store. But tell us how the public can participate via members or any other things that you need, volunteers or donations. Tell us about how people can participate in this.
Absolutely. So all the events I mentioned, just come on out. I guess with the one specification that the August 1st dinner, you do need to reserve a ticket online in advance. But otherwise, all these celebrations are open to the public. All these activities, they take place at Plymouth Notch. Please just come and join us. And all the information about what's always upcoming is on our website, coolidgefoundation.org. So that's the number one way you can get involved. There are also several other volunteer opportunities. I mentioned judging debate, just a minute ago. We also have what we call our Coolidge Scribe Project, which is a citizen-led effort to transcribe Coolidge's speeches and other primary documents and have those added to our growing archive at coolidgefoundation.org. Coolidge doesn't have an official presidential library like modern presidents do. And so his papers and speeches and primary sources are in many different archives around the country. So we're leading an effort to digitize all of those, get them up on the website so all Americans can study his record and his legacy. That's growing. We have thousands of documents now on that website. But scribes help us to transcribe those documents, to edit them, make sure they're accurate, and have them added. So that's another great volunteer opportunity. And if you ever have a question or want more information, please, you can write to us at info@coolidgefoundation.org. Again, info@coolidgefoundation.org. And finally, we are entirely privately funded. Coolidge himself wrote that he thought it was a great thing that presidents in his era didn't receive any kind of pension. He thought that if they needed to earn money, they ought to work even when they're out of the White House. Very Yankee-like. And of course, he was very careful with the use of taxpayer resources. He wouldn't, no doubt, he wouldn't have thought that they ought to support his own foundation after his presidency. So we don't seek, federal support or receive it. We rely entirely on private individuals and charitable groups that like what we do. And so if you think this is work that ought to, that ought to be supported, we certainly are grateful. And folks can make a contribution online, coolidgefoundation.org, or find information about how to send in a gift. So thank you to everyone who gets involved, either as a financial supporter or even more importantly, as a volunteer.
That's great. Well, thanks very much, Matthew. We've covered all the bases and given people directions to the website, and hopefully our viewers will take advantage of these opportunities. And you really did an excellent job of putting this all together for us. So thank you very much, Matthew.
Dennis, it's always great to see you. Thank you for all that you do, and we hope to see you in Plymouth soon too.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Has been Positively Vermont. This is Dennis McMahon, and my guest has been Matthew Denhart, the president of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Thank you for watching.